Osio. So I just wanted to ask, um, the Cherokee Nation didn't recognize freedmen that had come from, the same Trail of Tears, and with the Cherokee Nation now living in Oklahoma and just, this century or last like 4 or 5 years, they recognized the freemen. And I know this isn't specifically about land, but I wondered what your thoughts together were about that.
Yeah. Thank you for asking that question. So for folks who don't know, my tribe, Cherokee Nation, along with 4 other tribes in the southeast, the Muskogee, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, and the Seminoles, adopted chattel slavery from the U.S. South. So we enslaved people of African descent, and we even codified it into law. There was a period of time where Black Cherokees who had a clan by adoption or by birth were considered full citizens. But in the 1820s, we updated our constitution and basically adopted Black slavery, anti-Black racism, and codified it into law. Our 5 tribes fought on the side of the Confederacy during the Civil War in Indian Territory. And at the end of that war in 1866, we signed peace treaties with the Union. And for my tribe, Cherokee Nation, for the Seminoles, and for the Muskogees, one of the things in that treaty was that the people we had formerly enslaved and their descendants would be guaranteed citizenship in our tribes. That happened for a period of time, and then in the early 1900s, our tribe went through this process called allotment, where communally owned tribal land was divided up, and when the federal government came in to do allotment, they segregated the roles, and so they put Black tribal citizens on one role, and they put other tribal citizens on another role. And our governments were suppressed for about 70 years. We weren't allowed to practice democracy. Basically, we had like a puppet government controlled by the United States. And then in the 70s, we reconstituted our governments, and then there was a lot of anti-Black racism in those new governments. So for Cherokee Nation, originally in the 70s, freedmen descendants could enroll, but then in the 80s, we started disenrolling them. We had a really big, embarrassing, honestly, and shameful fight over freedmen enrollment, and eventually it ended in a court case that was very recent in 2017, in which a federal court said, based on the 1866 treaty, freedmen descendants have full citizenship rights. Our tribe acknowledged that case and has since updated our constitution. And where I come down on it is, and I write about this in the book, is that I think that if we believe in tribal sovereignty, if our tribes are truly sovereign, then we are responsible for our mistakes. We are responsible for the harm that we have caused, and we are accountable for that harm just like any other government would be accountable. And so we cannot ask the United States to be held accountable for the wrongs of history committed against us and not take account ourselves for the wrongs of chattel slavery. And I just want to say a couple more things, which is, the people that we enslaved, they didn't ask to be Cherokee or ask to become Muskogee. We made that choice for them. And their ancestors endured both slavery and the Trail of Tears, both allotment and segregation. And the other point I want to make is just that on the long path to repair, citizenship is only the first step. That's the floor, and we have a lot more work to do.
I just so appreciate you, and this is why I love being in conversation with you, because I think there's so many times where, in both ways, what Black people have done to Indigenous people, what Indigenous people have done to Black people, it's like we let the federal government be a wedge and use it as a reason why we can't have solidarity. And accountability will be needed in all ways. Like, there's no future world where we get the justice we need, but then we don't also have to remain accountable to people and for our actions. And I think that goes both ways. And so the only thing that I will add to this, because it was beautiful and perfect, is that the 5 tribes that she named are only 5 of hundreds of tribes in what we now call the United States of America. And so what I hear sometimes in the Black community when I fight for Black Indigenous solidarity is, well, they enslaved us too. And not every Indigenous person is a descendant of an Indigenous tribe that enslaved Black people. There are so many more, like you named 5 tribes that adopted chattel slavery. There are dozens of tribes that were actually absolutely abolitionists, were like doing raids on white churches that were trying to force them to enslave because it was something that the white federal government was bringing to them to make them complicit in something so that it was harder to make it a moral question. If everyone in the country is a part of this in some way, then everyone in the country is okay with it. And when Black and Indigenous people are building maroon societies and trying to dismantle the plantation economy, the government says we have to make more Indigenous people complicit so that it's harder to say who is the bad guy, who is the good guy. Same thing on the Black side. My ancestors, some of them were Buffalo Soldiers, which means that they were part of Indigenous removal in areas like Kentucky. And I have to take ownership for that, and it goes hand in hand. In the same way that I hope that you and Indigenous communities will be accountable to us, I also model that same thing. And so it's never a one and it's always a both and to me.
Okay. Like a minute.